indeed good to be here. When I used to preach as an intern, it was over in the other building, as some of you may know, and this was a field. This was an uncultivated field. However, at that time, in that year, in the middle of that field was a totem pole that was buried, and it's still there, I understand, and it's still emanating its good wishes and strength for all of you in this congregation. Well, I was one of 70 people who had the luck and the privilege to be on the People's Climate Justice train in New York City last September. And that experience in the Climate Justice March with 400,000 plus people, as well as the flood Wall Street direct action that happened the next day, are in fact the backdrop for my sharing this morning, and indeed for my life as I move on in my 8th decade as a two-legged on this planet. I want to begin by reading you a poem by UU Minister Reverend Barbara Peskin. It is called The Reunion. One of the old ones stood up into the morning light and spoke to those who had come back to the river. Now we have come again to this place. My life apart from you is not as strong. Yes, I have danced and I have told the stories at my own fire, and I have sung well to all of the directions, but when I am with you, my friends, I know better who it is in me that sings. When I am with you, my friends, when we are with each other, my friends, we know better who it is in us that sings. So I ask you to listen then, to listen to the old one's echoes through time, across cultures. Return to the river of a deeper, more natural way of living, so that we all may know better who it is in us that sings. And so too, you see, the Unitarian Universalist Association, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the UU College of Social Justice, and a contingent of UU climate justice activists from the UU Environmental Justice Collaboratory, including myself, as well as another handful of Unitarian Universalist groups like the Ministers Association and the Ministry for Earth and the Diverse and Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, our People of Color organization. These organizations are all asking Unitarian Universalists, asking you here, asking us to return to the river of the deeper sources of our faith and ethics, the deeper sources of our justice commitments, the river of life and of human energy, to whose banks as a faith family we are being summoned, so that we may join together and answer the call to do the impossible, and that is to stop and reverse the ravages of climate change, which means that we must fundamentally change the economic, socio-political, military, and cultural systems that are the cause of and the ongoing energies that drive climate change in the first place. Remembering the words of Vandana Shiva, brilliant food and environmental activist and anti-globalization author, we must stand together to dismantle the utopia of stupidity that is driving global capitalism's lust for obscene profit straight into the fury of climate collapse. We must stand together as a community of care and courage, a community that calls us to our best selves, our most fearless selves, a community that allows us to know better who it is in us that sings. We must stand together to stop the cascade of destructive environmental events that have driven millions of people into numbness or denial or both. We must stand together so that we can regain our true song, the song of life, the song of a thriving, vital planet that we can see with our eyes, taste with our tongues, touch with our hands, and feel with our hearts, knowing when we do that these simple acts are the very earth itself in us become conscious. The UUA, the UUSC, the College of Social Justice, and the other partnering UU organizations are asking Unitarian Universalists across this continent, and that means you, and that means me, to join together and commit to respond. Commit to respond to actions that will confront the issues of climate change, actions that will make a difference in our lives as individuals, as congregations, as a national and international community of faith. For many of us, the work of climate justice and just transition embodied by Commit to Respond is deeply informed by Naomi Klein's evolving and profound vision, which is brilliantly articulated in her new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. She writes, climate change is, in fact, the most powerful weapon to fight for equality and social justice. It is telling us to understand how all our fates are interconnected. Climate change tells us to be bold, to get ambitious, to play for keeps, because we cannot afford to lose. We cannot afford to lose. Commit to Respond is the launching point for environmental justice going forward now in the Unitarian Universalist world. It is beginning the national effort to bring climate justice, just transition, into the center of Unitarian Universalist justice work in our congregations, our districts and regions, and in our association. Beginning back in March 22nd, World Water Day, and continuing until through this next week, April 22nd, Earth Day of 2015, and beyond for as long as it takes. Hundreds of Unitarian Universalist churches are participating in a large-scale program of sermons, here is one today, actions of public witness, workshops, political advocacy, and nonviolent direct actions, and more. And they are, and we are doing so intentionally with humility, joining with partners, particularly frontline communities who know the impact of climate change already, even if we are very little experiencing it here in Walnut Creek. And from the larger community of our human kin where we live and move and have our beings. It is time. It is time that we assemble by the river to hear and affirm the songs that are our heart songs. Our heart songs to one another and to the blessed earth from which we draw our precious lives, the blessed earth that is in our time under siege. You remember the song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. Listen, listen, listen to my heart song. I will never forget you. I will never forsake you. I will never forget you. I will never forsake you. It is time that we commit even more deeply than ever down into the roots of climate change and economic disparity, into the roots of the complexity that we are up against. And Naomi Klein reminds us prophetically, getting to the root of why we are facing serial crises will lead us to a more habitable climate than we now have, and for a far more just economy than we now have. Getting to the root causes, getting to the root of why we are facing serial crises across our planet in every imaginable area of human culture and civilization, and in a global swath of living and geologic ecosystem processes. In economics, for instance, with the obscene disparity between the poor and the very rich. Obscene. In species extinction, which sees an unimaginable number of species going extinct every day. In legal and human rights, with the rise of a shameful prison industrial complex that generates immoral profits from mass incarceration of people of color, and the impunity with which police are killing men of color across the United States. In the profit-driven genetic modification of plants, profit-driven, I said, not science-driven, in the profit-driven genetic modification of plants spurred by the illusion that we are shrewd enough to avoid the consequences that we cannot even predict. And in government surveillance that literally tracks thousands upon thousands of phone calls, emails, and it may even be the postal mail we send to, well, you know the abhorrent and reprehensible list as well as I do. Getting to the root of why we are facing serial crises will lead us to a more habitable climate than the one we are headed for, and for a far more just economy than we have now. It is imperative that from our encampment at the river, that is, from within our congregations, from within this congregation, that draw strength from the power of the river and the beauty that we call life, it is imperative that we find the deep commitment to make climate justice and just transition a significant part of our awareness, that we relocate it right at the center of our justice work, and that we make a significant shift in our ways of life. It is imperative that we learn to look straight into the storm with integrity, with courage, and with a deepening sense of community. It is imperative that we look straight into the storm, not away, into it. Frederick Buechner, Protestant thinker and author, gives us language to locate the choice point that we can encounter when we seek to look into the storm and then step beyond what oppresses and demeans life in order to build a new way. He said, "The place God calls you is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." The place God calls you is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Well, so those of you who are agnostic, atheists, questioning still, or grounded in earth-centered beliefs might say it this way: the place you are called by what is most sacred within you is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place you are called by what is most sacred within you is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So this is the deeper story that we come into community to find. The deeper story of our own response to life, how we may enlist in the critical and great work of our times, for indeed it is, to defend life against the ravages of exploitation, oppression, marginalization, and violence. We also come here to church to find out how we can truly plumb the depths of our own integrity and thereby open our hearts to each other and the world, which in our time, which in these lives we have been gifted with, so desperately needs us. You all are needed. It matters not how old or how young you are. We all are needed. At its best, coming here is about responding to that unique call that is ours alone. The paradox is that while each of us has to find out what our own work is at this point in our life, how our personal gifts can be fully used, we can't do it alone. Without community, our gifts are useless. And without some form of community, the discovery of our gifts will very likely be tragically unrealized or impaired. Following our own path with courage and dedication, but doing so in the company of others, in service to others and the earth, and supported and loved by others, we are made fully human. And this is how we are redeemed. This is how we are helped to stand against negativity, oppression, and violence, and to claim our full humanity. Now understand that the word redemption is a loaded term in a Unitarian Universalist sanctuary like this. It can be triggering, it can be off-putting, it can be confusing. But what I want to lay bare from this little cabin of truth-telling, because that's what this is, that's what you call ministers to do, to speak the truth here from their hearts as best they understand it, right here in this place. Right? So what I want to lay bare from this little cabin of truth-telling is that one of the meanings of redemption that we can use and own and fully claim out of the 5 or more current that are in the language today is one that reveals an understanding of a true path with heart. True path with heart. Redemption, in the definition that I want to lift up, has to do with fulfillment, with carrying out, with discharging and making good. In this sense, redemption has to do with accomplishment, achievement, honoring, satisfying, and adhering to what it is truly ours to do. Coming here to this church and staying here despite all the demands that it places on us, all the huge and messy mistakes the others here make. That's a joke. Despite all the weird struggle with money, with judgments, with inside-outside dynamics, with the damn persistence of privilege and racism and heterosexism and ableism and all the rest of it, despite all of that, being here together has the power to redeem us. Or put another way, being here together empowers us to make good on the gift we were given when we were born as a human being. Being here together empowers us to make good on the gift we were given when we were born as a human being. One more point then before I offer you my closing words. The price that human consciousness, that awareness demands of us is the responsibility to respond. We see, and therefore we are called. We are called to commit. We are called to commit and respond. And that's why this campaign is called Commit to Respond. It is time for us to do that. As a collective, as a community of faith, we can't look away anymore. We cannot afford to look away. So let me close then with these words of Naomi Klein's. Because these words bear repeating over and over and over again. Climate change is, in fact, the most powerful weapon to fight for equality and social justice. It is telling us how to understand how all our fates are interconnected. Climate change tells us to be bold, to get ambitious, to play for keeps, because we cannot afford to lose. Takagayas in all my relations, Hashem and Amin, Inshallah. Shalom. Gracias.